Good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch, but not too much food because then you get tired and you sleep. My job is to keep you awake this afternoon, okay? A little bit after the lunch period. How many people were not here this morning for the part one? That's okay if you weren't, not here. Okay, there's no test. It's okay. You'll be all right. All right, very good. Well, welcome back. We have a lot to do in the next 30 minutes around what we're really talking about here. We call this the dirty details, which is really around product launch, but getting much more detailed than what we talked about this morning with the issues around where are we on the adoption life cycle, what target segments to pursue, as well as issues regarding specifics around the 9-point strategy. So let's jump right into that. I think we have about 200 people in here, so I hope you got your book. That was a gift. We're celebrating our 3 millionth book sold, so we decided to bring some along as presents. So if you do not have one, if you did not pick one up, I would go out right now and get one so you don't miss out. Otherwise, stay in your seats. All right, very good. Okay. Well, let's pick up with where we left off this morning. The story is really about lessons, both best practices and worst practices regarding product launch, new ventures, startups. You're all involved in a lot of important meetings, discussions, customer visits. But what we talked about this morning that we're going to be focusing on now is truly understanding kind of where we are and how we move forward to actually escalate and accelerate our work in the marketplace as we go forward. The book that you have in front of you, it was just updated in the past year. We pulled all 25 older tech examples out and put 25 new ones in based on our work with startup companies and others. So Google's in here, Apple, Salesforce, Lithium, a whole array of companies. 3D printing is also in here. I saw some demos out there on the 3D printing for the food business just before the break. That was very interesting. As you go through this, a couple reminders. One is you're all busy. Our estimate is that 20% of your busyness is unnecessary. It's because you don't have a clear, agreed-upon strategy for going to market. Yes, you're busy, but the 20% is kind of waste that we want to compress down. And so the thought is the following, is as you go through and do the work and think through the implications around what we've been describing here, what we're going to ask you to do is, in the next few days, read the first 65 pages to get a taste, an appetizer of what the book is about. If after 65 pages it tells you this is not relevant, then give it to your friend. It's okay. But what we found is most venture people, most startups, in the first 65 pages say, this sounds like my life just a little bit. Some of the debates we're having, some of the arguments, and so forth. So I hope you find it relevant. First 65 pages. And the purpose of why we do this is really the line above that. You've probably seen the rather sad typical success rates for new ventures, whether it's in Barcelona or anywhere else. It's about 15%, 1 out of 7. You want to be that 1 out of 7, but can we raise the odds? We don't guarantee you're going to be 100% successful because you use the chasm tools, but our experience says that with our tools, you get about a 4x boost. Not 100%, but about 60% likelihood that you're hitting the right market at the right time with the right compelling pain point being solved. And so that's what the book is all about. You know, we do workshops too, but I want you to start with the book and read that through first, and we'll go from there. Okay. So, those 3 questions that we talked about this morning, we're going to go one level deeper into those now. This morning seems like a long time ago at 9 o'clock, doesn't it? You covered a lot of important, interesting talks and fireside chats. You may remember we talked about the where, the which, and the how. And what we're going to be dropping into now is specifically the question for you. After you read the book, you'll get a much clearer view of what this question should really mean, but it's really about where are you on the adoption curve? Where are you on this thing that we call the tech market model? Not where your boss wants it to be, not where your angel investors wish it was, because you all want to be in Tornado, which is high growth, 45% or more. It's where do customers put you today? So I have a question for you as we start this. Let's say you're in the music streaming business and you have a startup in Barcelona in a garage with 4 really smart people. And you're saying, Apple, they're okay. Spotify, okay. Pandora, forget about them. We've got something better in the garage in Barcelona. And I ask you, where on this adoption curve is your music streaming startup? You know what I hear from most people? I hear from most people, well, Michael, we're only 50% done. We haven't launched yet, so we are in early market, obviously. Is that the right answer or the wrong answer? That's the wrong answer. Nobody gives a shit where you think you are. Are we clear on that? It's where the market puts you, and where is music streaming in Western Europe today? It's here. It's not here. Does that make sense? So it's not about, are you ready? It's, is the market ready for the category? And so Apple and our client Spotify, they're actually battling it out, growing at 70% a year, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and because you're in a garage in Barcelona doesn't mean you're in early market. Is that clear? Can that be confusing? And the reason is because it turns out that we recommend that if you have a music streaming business startup, you might want to find something different to do because the train has left the station and you're not on that train. Does that make sense? We've seen billion-dollar errors based on where we think we are by contemplating our own navel. So we've got to be very careful about that. Okay. And so as we go through and ask this question, I'm going to throw a quiz question in front of you as well. And that is the following. Is the reason that we actually care about where we are is it has fundamentals around, you'll recall from this morning that there's actually 14 different stages. And I know the reaction. People say consultants make everything too complicated. Look, it used to only be 5 stages, and now there's damn 14. The reality is your market is complicated, your customers are complicated, and there's nuances along here. So I'll share with you what I'm saying as far as that goes. Okay, so based on that, I'm going to ask you a question, which is, we've taken early market and divided early market into 3 different stages, 1A, 1B, 1C, almost like under a microscope. We have chasm. There's no A, B, and C. There's just you're either in the chasm or you're not. And remember, chasm is not that you're not selling. It's that the category has not yet fully adopted yet. Does that make sense? Normal customers are not yet buying this new app, this new solution, this new cloud software. And so what I'd like you to do is just take 30 seconds now, this is the homework, and just read this page through and tell me, where do you think either blockchain is, or IoT today, or augmented reality? One of those 3, blockchain, IoT, or augmented reality, AR. Where do you think those are when it comes to the reading that you have here on this page? Take 30 seconds or so and read this through, and then I'll check in on you in just a moment. Okay. So notice something about how we're actually demarking this. That was a quick 30 seconds, I know. Notice early market is when the category is truly not ready for normal adoption. It's more alpha tests, testing the marketplace, etc. Notice something about 1C. 1C is you actually have a category with a product. This could be an Amazon Echo, this could be a Siri device, this could be Google Home, this could be like we're going to say in a minute. And here in 1C, it means you're ready to potentially cross because what? At least one vendor has an 80% whole product. Not a perfect product, mind you, but good enough for the early adopters to actually buy. Do you remember what we talked about as far as whole product from this morning? It's not the core product, it's the full set. And do we have at least 80% of that? That's the question that's in front of us. And so thinking that through, 1A, 1B, 1C is a fundamental question. By the way, does this have anything to do with your forecasts about how fast your business can grow? Based on if you're in 1A and you're talking about ramping in Q4, stop taking those drugs. It's not helping. Okay, this is delusional thinking around the market. But if you're in 1C, you might be able to start moving across the crevasse, the chasm, the Kluft, whatever language you might be coming from. And so then there's chasm, and then let me show you, I'll give you a peek at the next page over. Forget this is not where your world is right now. You're not tornado. You wouldn't be in this room right now if you were in Tornado with your startup. You'd be out there shipping, right? You're like in a much more nascent, but you could be in bowling alley. And by bowling alley, we're suggesting these are specific segments that are adopting before the mass market is. And we have a 3A, 3B, and 3C, that different segments are going after those. Much like Amazon did with books, or Spotify focused on Scandinavia first, Nordics, Sweden, Denmark, Finland as well. Actually, they threw that in there as well. So it's the top northern countries, then moved into the rest of Europe and US and now other parts. They just launched, by the way, in Japan last September. And so it's a much different place on the life cycle depending on geography. Okay, so where would you put blockchain today? You heard the interview yesterday that Alex conducted in the evening. Think of Bitcoin as one example. Where would you put blockchain? Has it crossed the chasm? Yeah. No, it has not. It's still in the early phase. A lot of people would say it's probably in 1B, maybe not 1C yet. That would be overly ambitious. And the real test is whether something's actually moved across the chasm into the main marketplace, is the answer to this question. Can you find groups of normal, pragmatist customers, not the early freak show in the early market, but normal who can no longer imagine life without this category in place? Does that make sense? And with blockchain, most of your lives are actually pretty darn good right now without that in place. Does that make sense? Now you're saying, wait a minute, Michael, I'm an early adopter. That's a different story on the left-hand side. How about an example like virtual or augmented reality? Those are two different categories. Where might you place that? How about virtual reality? Can we find some applications already across that might suggest that it's in 3A? Certain segments? Travel agencies are starting to use these. Training organizations in France. A number of places are using virtual reality and augmented reality to do, but it's not yet. Does that make sense? That's a bit early, but it's perhaps still across. I would like you, as you read the book, to think through where your categories are. Hey, wait a minute. Is it possible, and let me just get to a slide that's clean here, is it possible that where your category is might depend on the geography that you're competing in? Whenever a consultant asks, is it possible, it usually is. Okay, that's how we think. So in the US, music streaming is in Tornado. In Spain, it's actually been a struggle for some companies, including Apple and Spotify and others. In Japan, it just launched. In Japan, people still want to own the music. They download the music. They don't stream it. Very different behavior level. And so it's going to vary. So please, if you call me up or send me an email or send me a LinkedIn invite and tell me our strategy is to become a global winner in the X technology, I'm not going to answer your email. That's a vision. That is not a next 6 to 24-month strategy. Does that make sense? Go find something first to go after. And what I hope is that later on today, and let me just get to that slide, when we do the Q&A, we can ask and answer some questions around some of the timing of a lot of the work that you do here. But basically, these are key slides, 22 and 23. I should also mention, I see a few of you taking photos. That's great if you want to throw it up on Twitter or whatever. But I'm happy to share the slides as well. So if you do decide you want copies of the slides, just send me a LinkedIn invite or an email or whatever, and we're happy to provide those to you. We want you to utilize these tools. Okay. So one important question that we've been addressing is, where are you competing? And if your investors have a different view of where you are than you as the founders, then you've got to get agreement before you can go on. You can't get disagreement on that question. The second piece is, what do we attack first? What do we cross out? And what do we double down on? And you saw the slide from this morning that specifically talked about, we know there's a lot of different technologies out there, some of which you in the room here are actually launching as we speak, here in Barcelona, in Stockholm, in Brussels, in Warsaw, a very international group here, as well as the US. And so if you think about those 9 key trends and the element of how do we make sure we focus properly, the idea about best and worst practices or do's and don'ts is, can you find a specific segment or two to go after, but not more? In fact, in the book, I wrote about 50 pages in this book, so whatever your favorite 50 pages are not the ones I wrote. Our boss, Jeffrey Moore, the chairman, he writes very well. I put examples in, that's my 50 pages, but the examples in here, we changed them all out except one. We left Documentum in there. Documentum was a software company where we took them from 75 segments down to 55, down to 30, down to 12, down to 3. And in the book, you'll read it. There's a case, about 4 pages, that describes how they found the pharmaceutical company segment as their dominant place. This is a B2B play. And that they won 37 out of the top 40 pharma companies within 18 months. This is Merck, this is Pfizer, this is all the Swiss companies. Why? Because they were solving a real pain point for them in FDA approval for new drug therapies. But the funny part was, Documentum had 75 segments. You don't have 75, I get that. You might have 12 or 8 or 3 or 9. Documentum only had 75 employees at the time. That's a bad ratio. 75 segments and 75 employees, you're not going to make that work. So the CEO, Jeff Miller, was asked, wasn't that kind of risky to go from 75 down to 3 and then eventually to 1 or 2? And he goes, yeah, it was risky. You know what was riskier? Continue to spray and pray across the full landscape in a horizontal mode and never dominating anything. I see some smiles because you know, and this would never happen to you as startup people, but other companies do the spray and pray, right? Not in this room, I get that. Nobody here would ever do that. And so if we think this through, it turns out that there's actually, and let me just get the pen working here for a moment, it turns out that there's actually 9 factors. There's 9 factors in which you can score whether you have a good segment to go after. And what's the number one criterion that most people who are optimistic, startup, and new venture people, what's the number one criterion they use for what segment to go after? You know what it is. Give me the biggest, hairiest, mother of all segments, because big is good. Get that? How hard is this market strategy anyway? And I've got some news for you. Mark Rose's experience, my experience, and others on our Chasm team say, can you find really big, really bad segments to go after? And the answer is yeah, you do it all the time. So you're going to see a list of 9 factors, and size of segment is not one of the top 3. Because if you're not solving a real pain point for that segment, then it won't move for you. It won't transition. It won't gain traction. And so let's take a look at what those 9 factors are. And I'll show you some, they're spreadsheets and tools, and in a moment I'll explain what those all are about. And the book does a pretty good job. Basically, there's 9 factors. And you can score each one a 1, a 5, or a 3. And there's a set of criteria for that. So perfect score is a 45. You're not going to find a 45. If you did, you wouldn't be in this room today. You'd be out there engaging with that segment. But what we find is that any segment, and I think you get this, it's 5 times 9 is 45. Any segment where the score is greater than or equal to a 37 out of 45 says there's a strong correlation based on our last 225 examples of startups and new product launches. There's a strong correlation that the problem you're solving and the segment you're going after, there's a good strong interchange there, a good strong correlation. And by the way, segment can be a demographic, it could be a vertical market, it could be a geography, it could be a whole host, but it's defined by how customers view what you're doing. And so those segments and the scoring around those, the 45, and you'll see there's a nasty little bit here, which is called the weighting factors. We won't get into the details here. You can read about these. But basically, the multiplier gives you a basis point out of 100 to say not all 9 of these are equally important. So let's break the mystery, shall we, and say, what are those criteria? The criteria, so I'm not throwing anything new at you. These are just the 9 criteria. These are what they are. And take a look. I'm going to be quiet this is hard for me to do, for 45 seconds as you read this slide through. These are the 9 areas that help determine whether the segment you're going after is going to be a good one for you, or a neutral one for you, or a negative one for you. And the red ones are weighted higher because they're even more important. So I'll be quiet for those seconds while you read that through. So 5 equals a strong score for you in that business model for that segment. A 3 is neutral and a 1 is weak. So 5 times 9 is 45. That's the critical number. And each one of these matter. I'm going to point out a couple of these. One is there an accessible, well-funded target customer segment? We know what well-funded means. Do they have some money to spend, whether it's a small business, an SME, an enterprise, a consumer? Is there some money around? If it's a near-bankrupt airline industry, you might want to find a different segment to go after. And please don't tell me real estate. Tell me large commercial real estate organizations in Western Europe, or maybe a network of residential real estate. It's got to be that granular. Does that make sense? Real estate is back to horizontal spray and pray. You've got to be much more vertical and specific. And so that first one is not just are they well-funded, but are they accessible to us? And by that means, can we, through the web, through our sales force, can we reach these people? Do they want to talk to us or no? And then the second one is, how much pain is there currently in place inside that segment? Is it high or medium or low? Hey, it's great to be optimistic as a startup person. Have you been in meetings where somebody says, the customers in that segment, the banking segment, they don't know they have a problem. We have to educate them on that. Have you been in those meetings? How well is that working for you? No. If they have to be educated on your solution, that's okay. If they don't have a feel or a pain that the problem exists in their workflow, then go find another fucking segment. You don't have time to educate them. Does that make sense? You might be optimistic, but that's not going to pay off in the long term. And so that second one is, do they believe they have a problem? Third is feasible whole product. Can we deliver not just the product, but the specifics around what we spoke about earlier, the true whole product, 100% solution that we described this morning, that's done a pretty good job of describing as well in the book. And then, on top of that, a couple other key elements. You can read some of these to yourself, but one that's really crucial is the 9th one. And the 9th one says, if we win in the initial segment, is there virality or adjacencies that we can get into? If you're going for doctors and your beachhead segment is anesthesiologists, and you say the second segment is cardiologists, and you go, they're all ologists, how different can they be? If you're married to one, you know what I'm talking about. They don't talk with each other. They're on the same floor in many healthcare facilities, but the cardiologists and anesthesiologists, they don't talk, they don't refer, it's not adjacent. It has to be from the customer's viewpoint that the adjacency exists. And so as we see this from B2C or B2B standpoint, these 9, what's missing from this list? How about that size of segment question? So what you're going to see is the 9th criterion is important, but we have a tiebreaker, a 10th one. And you know I'm going through this pretty fast, but again, the book and our future workshops if you're interested, that all can help. But for now, stick with the book and perhaps some of our blogs. The 10th one is, if needed, you can use that as a tiebreaker. And so what that really suggests, if you have 4 segments and they score as follows on the, we'll go weighted score, an 81, a 77, a 62, and a 55. I ran out of room at a 47. If, based on the scoring criteria we just spoke about and the weighted nature of those, if we take a look at those and say, the 81 is our highest scoring segment, it's also our largest segment, then life's pretty good. We don't have a problem there, right? What happens if the 62 is 3 times larger than all the other segments that you're going after? An optimist says, you know what? Our investors need numbers. They want to see a ramp. We're going to hold our nose and go in there. You know what roadkill is? Roadkill is something that gets run over before it even knows the car has hit it. You are roadkill at 62. It means there's misalignment, that either the customer has a problem in that segment, but your solution cannot solve it adequately, or the reverse is true. They don't recognize they have a problem, and you have a solution that they're not willing to buy. So all 9 of those matter. That's the 10th criterion. And so what we do with our clients is we go through and we just take the scoring criteria, and I'll give you an example. This is the low score. 71 out of 100 says you cannot proceed with this without high risk on your part of failure. This is actually a fintech example from a anonymized example. We call it ProFinance. It's compliance software for large US banks from a startup. A 71 says you're basically a dead man walking. You're not even close to the cutoff point, which is 85. And then we say, hey, progress would be this one. And by the way, it's easy to screw with these numbers and give them all 5s. I get that. But that's not the point here. The point is true numbers that earn their right to be a 5 or a 3 or a 1. And so ultimately, what we see out of this is a level of granularity that allows you to score the higher ones, winnow out the lower ones, and decide what it is that you're going to actually go after as a, we'll call it, specific segment to pursue and attack first. What one is that going to be? Now, the book says focus on one segment, and it's a little bit of a lie. The truth is you can go after 2 segments if you have enough assets, people, and resources. But we didn't want to say 2 in the book, because if we said 2, you know what you would do? You'd go, yeah, 3's better, and man, we're ambitious, so we're going to do 5, and now we're back to spray and pray again. So 1 or 2 is optimal for this, okay? I dare you to show me an example of any of these companies who focused on more than 1 or 2 at the same time to be able to go to market. And so fundamentally, the choice points are really around these 9 criteria that we've now vetted and tested with an array of different types of clients in the B2B and B2C realm. And the reading in the book, I hope, will provide you with some momentum around that. And stop saying size of segment is you're throwing out a lot of really good medium-sized opportunities by using size as your first screening instead of your last screening on the list. That's really the main point of our discussion at this point. How many people, if we're going to use a quick example here, how many people here know the Google business called Nest? How many people know Nest? Okay, cool. All right, nice. All right. One of our clients, they're a Google subsidiary as a part of the Alphabet business. It's a self-learning thermostat, smartphone enabled. They are right now, in Western Europe and the US, trying to figure out how are they.
You want to have a money?
So we'll see. So we have like the university approach and the school approach and the mindset thing, and we have like this thing about happening but not
Thank you very much.
well
Thank you.
organized.
Numbers right now. This is public information, or else I would mention it. And so in Western Europe, US, Western Europe, et cetera, they're looking to figure out the following. It's truly a question of how are they going to get across this chasm? What segment or application area is going to be their beachhead, their momentum builder, before everybody else who's out there actually adopts? And so what's in front of them right now, and they're using the scoring, rating, and ranking criteria, is they're actually looking at 3 different possible application segments. One is, do they stick with what got them to the party, which is their thermostat? You can control it from home, you can control it from the car, you can control it from your workplace. Or should they go a little bit simpler and move away from something along the lines of a thermostat and do a much simpler install around something like a CO2 and smoke alarm? Or should they change completely and move into security business over here and say we're going to focus on that as the home appliance that gets us across the chasm? Now, the funny thing is, if you're really an early adopter, you know what you're thinking right now? This would make a great bundle. Put them all together, and I would love to buy that. And you're not normal if that's what you're thinking. You're part of the 11% or 9%, and I love you for it, but that's not the main marketplace. The main marketplace is typically a killer pain point that needs to be solved, and the question is which one of these is Nest/Google going to actually figure out and go after, and which ones are they going to cross out for now? And right now they've got R&D spread across all of them. And then once you've chosen, where you're going and what you're going to attack, that last piece we want to dig deeper into, is what we call the 9 points of failure or the 9 points of success as well. This is the go-to-market strategy that has to happen from a cross-functional standpoint. And thinking this through for a moment, in these last couple of minutes, think this through for a moment, is there's 9 elements. Please don't ever come to me or to your founders or to your investor go, we have a 300-page plan for how we're going to win in Western Europe or North America. If you have a 300-page plan, it means you don't have a plan. We suggest 11 slides, okay? 11 slides. One is this one, and I'll give you a quick example as we wrap this up and say the point of view on this is it's got to be very clear, and your investors, this is an example, your investors will be able to read this and not have to ask you follow-up questions about what you're about around these 9 areas. So this is one slide, and then there's a second slide regarding what's the specific details of the business objective, and then it's a click down on each of the other 9 areas. That's 11. You can have 100 pages of appendices, but don't make anybody read more than 11 slides to understand what your business model is for the next 12 or 24 months. This is what we use at our venture firms in the US. This is what we use with our startups. This is what we use with our investment community. And those 11 pages can stand alone, but here's the warning label on the side of that cigarette pack, shall we call it, and that is this. This is not a marketing plan. You need to get the entire venture team, your cross-functional group, your marketing, your sales, your engineering, your development, your CEO, all aligned on this. If your marketing person writes this up, you're doomed. They can lead it, but it has to be cross-functional buy-in. Even finance and supply chain need to have their own point of view on this. Otherwise, you know what happens? Marketing gives the plan to sales, and in California we say, thanks for sharing. You know what thanks for sharing means? It means I didn't really want to accept this, but I'll be polite. And then as soon as you leave the room, the sales guy goes, I don't know what the hell that is, but that's not my plan. I got a different plan. And all of a sudden now we have a non-functional alignment. Does that ring true that might even happen in some of the great teams that you're working on, which you have functional disagreements? And so to pull this together as kind of a capstone, a couple things to consider in the last 30 seconds here. And again, we'll do Q&A later on this afternoon in a more informal way with a smaller group, whoever wants to go further with this. But it really says, if we can't get these questions answered, and then what you have on that plasticized sheet, what I hope you can take back to your business is in the lower right-hand corner are those questions around the 9 points. We got to be able to answer those. And if we have fuzzy answers, or if marketing and the CEO and sales have different answers, then we have misalignment and non-strategy. So let me leave you with this thought as we part and see you again later on this afternoon. And that is, if you want to read a little bit further in this, but you want to read something in Spanish, we actually have a blog, and we'll be happy to send you the link. It's what we call the 7 deadly sins of how not to cross the chasm by making these 7 mistakes. It's in English, it's in Spanish, you're welcome to read in whatever language you'd like. We're hoping that you're not doing all 7 of these, you're probably not, but there might be 1 or 2 or 3 that you see, hey, that's what we're arguing about. It's a very light read, it can help you move forward with what we're doing here. So what I will do is see you back later on this afternoon at around 4:45 for a final set. It may not be all of you. If you want to make it a select group of people who really care deeply about this topic, I'm happy to do this with 50 people. If more want to join, you're of course welcome to. So with that, let me thank you for your attention after lunch. It's a hard time for you to be awake. I hope this was helpful to you, and good luck for the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Thank you.